Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon. My name is Melanie Canales. I am the Challenging Corporate Power Project Manager at RAFI. And today we are going to be presenting to you the Grocery Gap Atlas. So a bit of the structure for today, we're going to introduce ourselves and Open Spatial Lab, who collaborated with us on building this tool. We'll talk a bit about why we made it. We'll have a live demo with Susan Pagan, and we'll talk a bit about what we learned, corporate concentration, how concentration impacts food access, as well as an applied case study from a grocery store in Nebraska. After that, we'll go over future uses of this tool, and we'll have a Q&A section. We have some more people popping in as I'm talking, but I will pass it off now to Erin Johnson, our co-director of policy at RAFI, who will be introducing who we are and what we do.
All right, welcome everyone. As Melanie said, my name is Aaron Johnson. I'm a policy co-director at RAFI. A little bit about RAFI. We're a organization that works on food system reform and justice in North Carolina and across the country. Our mission is to challenge the root causes of unjust food systems, supporting and advocating for economically, racially, and ecologically just farming communities. And we envision a thriving, sustainable, and equitable food system where farmers and farm workers have dignity and agency, where they're supported by just agricultural policies, and where corporations and institutions are accountable to their community. We were founded about 30 years ago. We're based in North Carolina, but we serve farmers across the country and specifically in the Southeast US and now the USVI and Puerto Rico. We provide services to small, mid-sized farmers who have been marginalized, and we provide a lot of technical assistance for accessing USDA programming, like loans from the Farm Service Agency or conservation contracts from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We utilize all that information that we gather in our technical assistance and service provision to make recommendations for policy change as well. And we shape federal policies both through the legislative process with things like the Farm Bill, as well as through administrative advocacy with USDA and other government agencies. I'll pass it off to Susan now to talk a little bit about Open Spatial Lab.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Pagan. I'm the program lead of the Open Spatial Lab at the University of Chicago Data Science Institute. We're also joined today by my collaborator, the co-lead Dylan Halpern, who's the technical lead of the Open Spatial Lab. So OSL, or the Open Spatial Lab, is part of the University of Chicago Data Science Institute. I'll give a little more of an introduction to how this work fits into the broader mission of the Institute and University of Chicago in a bit. But I'll just note for Open Spatial Lab, where we come at this, we were launched in 2022. And we create open source data tools and analytics to solve problems using geospatial data science. Our mission is to diversify perspectives included in data science and spatial data science more broadly, and to reach a broader audience through developing accessible tools for data exploration, management, and visualization. And to do this, we work with partners locally and across the US, like RAFI, to understand the needs and uses to activate that data for community exploration and policy
See the sign for Charlottesville?
And if everyone could just mute their mics, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much. And that's it for me for now. Great to be here.
Thanks, Susan. So I'm going to launch into why we made this tool. Since 2000, we have seen more and more local grocery stores being bought up or divested by larger grocery chains. Observing this, we wanted to see what we could learn from the data on a national level. Some of the questions that we were considering while building the Grocery Gap Atlas include: how does corporate concentration impact food access on a local, state, or national level? Another question we were thinking about was how the consolidation of the grocery industry has impacted the food system. Has it created a more strong, equitable food system for farmers and consumers, or has it hurt it? In order to understand why we made this tool, I'd like to hear from all of you about what your grocery experiences are like. Feel free to chime in verbally or through the chat on any of the questions listed here, like how far away is your nearest grocery store, how the grocery landscape has changed in your area. Have you seen stores closed or divested? And can you easily find local products when you're grocery shopping? I'm seeing some things roll in the chat. Thank you for writing these things. Local food manufacturer have had more discontinued. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of small independent grocery stores are struggling to stay afloat in communities. People relying on local farmers markets for local products. Yeah, mass distributed products. Yeah, this is very helpful. A lot of what we hear from folks when we ask them this question is that they have seen grocery stores divesting in their neighborhoods, that it's challenging to find local products, and as stores divest, grocery stores can be further and further away from where they live. Yeah, please continue putting your experiences in the chat because it's great to see what all of our experiences are like because they can be quite disparate. But those disparate experiences are why we made this tool. We made it to measure the impact of a rapidly consolidating grocery market and how that impacts food access in inequitable ways across the country. So the Grocery Gap Atlas can be used to visualize data to better understand the impacts of market consolidation on food access. We can use it to examine data to illuminate inequitable trends in the grocery industry. It'll make data accessible for download and further exploration. And we're hoping that it'll advocate for solutions to build a more just and resilient food system through equity and accountability. With all this in mind, I am going to pass it to Susan, who will be leading us through a live demo of how to use the tool. Susan and her colleague Dylan, who she mentioned, were instrumental in making this tool a reality. So I'm very excited to share this with her. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Susan can share hers.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie. Really appreciating everyone's comments in the chat. I'm like reading them come through. Yeah, a lot of intersections with the work that we are highlighting here today, especially with inequities in where are grocery stores located, where are they changing, and how we can explore what are some of the trends in that. Okay, so can everyone see my screen okay? Looks good, Melanie?
Yeah, that's
okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so just to reiterate, I'm so thrilled to be able to give a live demo and introduce the Grocery Gap Atlas, this data tool that we developed in partnership with RAFI in order to explore the impacts of corporate market concentration and structural inequities on food access. So just a little more context about who we are as researchers, as a data science institute, and how this collaboration with RAFI came to pass. So we're the Data Science Institute at University of Chicago. We're based on the south side of Chicago, which experiences a lot of disparities in food access in particular, and a lot of changes in the grocery market as well. But the Data Science Institute is the hub for data science and AI, education, research, and engagement across the University of Chicago campus. We support education programs ranging from high school up to graduate programs. We support cross-disciplinary, very interdisciplinary research through our research initiatives, as well as our affiliated faculty, scholars, and postdocs doing their own research, pursuing their own research. And then we partner with industry, social impact organizations, civic groups, and local governments on a number of different research projects, ranging from applied research projects for our students to engage on, as well as for our faculty and staff, in order to drive impact through data science. So this partnership with RAFI came about as part of an effort to collaborate with and support the sort of organizational data capacity of nonprofit organizations as part of our work. And RAFI has just been a fantastic partner that we've worked on a number of different projects, actually. And so it was really great to be able to build on past projects that Erin has led with some of our other colleagues at the Institute in order to explore this new topic of food access and corporate market concentration. We introduced Open Spatial Lab before, but just to highlight, our work is led by Dylan Halpern and then myself, based at the Institute. So let's dive in to the Grocery Gap Atlas. Again, from a data perspective, we were looking to, when working with RAFI, we basically identified this broader issue, right? But then how do we approach this from building an accessible data tool that can better communicate this data to understand the impacts of grocery consolidation on food access? And then really importantly, this data, some of this data exists, some of this data, like this data is all publicly available, but it's not really readily accessible. People don't know where to find it, and it's actually really difficult to find and difficult to access and like use, like if you actually wanted to like run some of your own analyses and numbers. So we wanted to make this data clean and accessible for more researchers, more community members to use. And then to support RAFI in advocating for solutions that build a better food system through equity and accountability. So this is the platform, the Grocery Gap Atlas. Here's the URL. I'm going to navigate, I'm going to pull it up right now, but you can go to this URL and follow along. As I dive in, I'll just ask Melanie if there's anything that I should pause on, or you want to emphasize anything, feel free to interrupt me in this.
You're doing great.
So the Grocery Gap Atlas, when you go to grocerygapatlas.rafiusa.org, this is the landing page you'll find. There are a number of different ways to dive into using this platform and actually getting your hands on the data, visualizing the data, and exploring the tool. So just to highlight, there's a few different entry points here. So first is our reports feature. We'll go through this, but you can find sort of comprehensive reports on a particular place. So you can look at the census, a census tract, as sort of like a micro neighborhood or a micro area. We have data on census tracts for all 50 states. So you can look at reports on a particular census tract for a county, for any county in the United States, and for all 50 states in the US. And then you can also look at a national report. You can read case studies about key trends in market concentration and food access. The case studies were primarily written by our colleagues at RAFI, by Melanie and Erin, with using the data from this tool and some of the analysis that we were able to produce from this tool. And we'll be highlighting one of those. Melanie will highlight it later in this hour. You can read more about the Grocery Gap Atlas, a little bit about our motivations, importantly about the data, where it comes from, what we did to it, how we got it from there to here, all that information with documentation about the data and the project, and then a collection of additional resources on these topics and themes to explore. And then importantly, we're going to dive in with the main map here. To take a look at some of the national trends in the data. So I'm just going to refresh this. Oh, I guess I have it. Actually, I have it pulled up here. So I'm just going to start here. So when you go to the the map page. So this is just grocerygapatlas.rafiusa.org/map. You have a number of different data sets or data variables that you can put on the map to start. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so we can see the entire country. This is a lot, right? I'm not going to go too much into like exactly what this data is showing, but we wanted to communicate the visual experience of seeing this data on the national scale. So what we're looking at here, all of these shades of pinks and magentas, what we're looking at here is at the census tract unit for across the United States. So this is thousands and thousands of census tracts across the United States. We are looking at the data topic of a measure of market concentration in each of these census tracts. So here we're looking at market concentration for the year 2000. We also have 2010, 2020, and 2023. So what is this measure? What is this measure of market concentration? What does this mean? This was a really important aspect of this project and analysis, but market concentration is essentially a measure of how concentrated the grocery market is in a particular area. And by that, what we mean is how many corporate owners there are of those grocery stores that serves a particular area. Now you might think, well, we have like 5 grocery stores in, let's say, my area, 10-minute driving distance or something like that. There's like 5 grocery stores, so that's 5 different owners of those grocery stores, right? Not always. Sometimes those are all independently owned, but as Melanie mentioned before, what we've seen more and more of across the country is there are fewer corporate owners or corporate holding companies that own a lot of the major supermarket chains and grocery chains across the US. So we wanted to explore how those trends have changed. So we gathered data starting in the last for the last 20 years. And we have snapshots here of market concentration at the year 2000. So I want to highlight that the dark pink is highly concentrated, meaning there's fewer corporate owners in that area. And the white is less concentrated, meaning they're more independent, separately owned stores or chains. So we have 2000, 2010, we're starting to see some more darker pink. We're seeing some shifts in the data. Now we're looking at 2020, and this is the most recent data from 2023. If you see some of these census tracts, they're like white. That means that data was not available just in the reporting for this data set. So this is really interesting, right? So then we can start to look at, again, I'm just zooming out on the whole country, but we can zoom in, use the tool to zoom in on Chicago. Again, this is like looking at individual census tracts, so you can really get down in a very densely populated city like Chicago. This is just a few blocks, but in a more rural area, I know we had some folks from New Mexico on the call. The census tracts are much larger because it's less densely populated. We can start to look at those trends locally, but then we can explore some other data variables as well. So we wanted to highlight food access is sort of the other key variable here. So when we look at food access across the US, we're looking at a different data set here. I guess I'll just highlight what's important to understand about these colors is that blue is better food access and red is poorer food access. And how we measured food access is explained in detail more on the About page. But essentially, we took a measure of grocery stores in a particular area within a reasonable driving distance for a particular area. And then also how large those grocery stores were in proportion to the population. So if there's like a huge population, two small grocery stores, that's likely not meeting the needs of a large population. But if there's like a large population and 5 large supermarkets in the area, that's probably better meeting the need of that community. So we developed this measure that's, again, right away, we're seeing some interesting trends. We're seeing these donuts. We're seeing these circles around major metropolitan areas. So if we zoom into Atlanta, for example, we're seeing, again, blue is better food access, red is poorer food access. So we're sort of seeing these trends of the blue around the cities, or more blue around the cities. We see this definitely in the Northeast. Again, this data right now we're looking at is relative to the entire country. So there's a little bit of the nuances washed out because we're looking at a national data set. But still, you see these really interesting trends. So one of the key takeaways that we got from this is that, it looks like the suburbs are being pretty well served by their grocery store supply and in terms of the accessibility. But the cities, like the actual urban centers and then more rural areas for sure are not being served as well. So we're looking at, again, I'll just highlight, we can look at food access supply for 2000, 2010, 2020. So this is pretty interesting. And then we wanted to explore, okay, how do we compare measures of food access and measures of market concentration? One way we can do that is we can flip back and forth on the map. We can take a screenshot and put them side by side and maybe zoom in on Detroit here. We can zoom in here. And then we can look at food access here and sort of see what trends we can see with that. But then we also wanted to utilize another approach to mapping data. And this map is called a bivariate chloropleth map. Bivariate is the important term here. Bivariate meaning 2 variables. So essentially, we're putting these 2 maps together, 2 data variables together into one, visualizing it as one map. So I'm going to highlight that. And this is really one of the key features of this map, because it allows us to explore in one visualization, where is there high corporate market concentration and poor food access, because that is really one of the key trends that we're looking to explore, is what is the impact of this consolidating corporate landscape in terms of groceries and supermarkets. What is the impact on food access? Anecdotally, RAFI, and through their own research, not just anecdotally, but through their own research and experience, they have seen this borne out of more concentration leading to poorer food access. But we wanted to see, okay, what does the data actually say? What else can we learn from the data on that? So here, again, the important sort of interpretation of this map is blue are the areas with high corporate concentration and poor food access. If we look at the bottom of this legend, we have this gray being sort of the flip of that. So that's the least concentrated and the better food access relative to the rest of the country. So these areas in blue, though, are the ones that we're quite interested in, because those are areas of perhaps highest concern in terms of these trends of already experiencing poor food access and experiencing high corporate market concentration. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here just so we can take a look at a particular place. Let's look at the Southeast here. So we're seeing, some of these trends and the more rural areas near the coast, but then we also definitely see it in Appalachia. We're seeing a lot of this blue here. So those are areas that we might want to, our RAFI might want to target in terms of looking into, okay, what's actually happening on the ground here, and how does this compare to other experiences across the country? What are the factors in that particular location, in that particular community driving these trends? I'd like to also highlight I'll highlight the community highlights feature and market highlights, because this is really interesting. So when we're looking at a particular area on the map, you can perhaps you want to look at, okay, so how does these areas of most concern, high concentration, poor food access, how does that intersect with, let's think about like poverty, right? So we brought in data for the entire country, for all census tracts, counties, states, but we're looking at census tracts, the poverty rate. So we have data on visualizing data on the poverty rate. You can control these highlights. So now we're highlighting areas with a poverty rate of 30% or higher, which is quite high. In terms of a poverty rate for a particular community, but unfortunately not uncommon in the United States. But you can use this slider to look at places with even more extreme poverty, high poverty rates. So you can totally control this, going down to zero, no poverty, to 50%, or whatever you might want to investigate or look at. And then these areas are highlighted and you can zoom in and investigate further. Now you can do the same thing with the market highlights. So you can use these buttons to highlight the areas where a national brand is present in the local market. Now, this is really interesting because I saw someone in the chat earlier mention Ahold Delhaize, which I was surprised someone mentioned it because a lot of people, most of us don't know what that is. I only know what this is because I've been engaging with RAFI on this project. But Ahold Delhaize is a major international holding company that owns many chains of grocery stores across the United States and across Europe. But I'm looking at North Carolina here. So Ahold Delhaize owns Food Lion, Stop and Shop. Hannaford is a big brand in the Northeast. So when we look at areas where Ahold Delhaize captures 30% of the grocery market, we're seeing it really concentrated on the East Coast. Then we can also look at areas where Ahold Delhaize controls 50% of the market. We're still seeing some places come up here. We can do the same for any of these brands. Some of you might know Publix they're big in the Southeast, so we can look at this. And then I just wanted to highlight Walmart. So you can really visually see the impact of Walmart and how much of the grocery market that they dominate across the entire United States. This was actually a really striking finding from this project, coming out of this project, from both the data side and from RAFI's perspective as like an advocacy and policy finding, that Walmart dominates so much of the market in so many places. This is 50% of the grocery market. This is 70 places where Walmart captures 3/4 of the entire grocery market across the United States. So we're still seeing, it's probably hundreds of census tracts, just visually estimating, dozens at least, where they capture 75% of the grocery market for that particular census tract. So this is really interesting. This is all to say that you can use this to explore the data in many different ways, kind of endless opportunities. Lastly, I know this is a lot of information, but again, just a quick tour. Lastly, we wanted to highlight the reports feature. So I am going to pull up a report for, let's say I am interested in trends in North Carolina in particular. So I am going to pull up report, go to report state. I am going to use the drop down to navigate to North Carolina. And here we have sort of a summary report of North Carolina. See, my Wi-Fi is slow. It should be loading this market share data. But as it loads that, I'll just spin through this. You can see for every state and for every county that you might be interested in, every census tract, we have we have four data measures that you can compare and contrast for additional context about that place. So these are different scores we were looking at food access before. So, we can look at the scores, how they score on the scale of food access, market concentration. We also look at the socioeconomic disadvantage index, which is a data set from scholars at University of Wisconsin. They produced this data set on socioeconomic disadvantage, and also looking at a score on residential segregation. How highly segregated or not is a particular area based on residential trends. Looks like this is maybe it's not loading, but I pulled it up on this page before, so I'm just going to look at this page. Again, this is the map of North Carolina state report. So these are the same scores we were just looking at. And then this gives you a sort of a bird's eye view of the market share of grocery stores for that particular state. So again, we see for North Carolina, we see Ahold Delhaize, because I think Food Lion is just a really big regional supermarket. And I'm sure others too that are captured by Ahold Delhaize, but they have a quarter of the grocery market statewide in North Carolina. But then we also see Walmart is not far behind at 23%, and then Kroger, Alex Lee, looking all the way down to Target at 1%, and then smaller independent grocery store owners making up the other category. These are those that capture less than 1%. So again, we see this data as a data table. Just scrolling down, then you can also see community information about that particular state or place that you're looking at the report from, total population, median household income, poverty rate. These are all publicly available data variables that we pulled in from the US Census. And then also demographic data on race and ethnicity, so we can start to explore and better understand how there may be disproportionate impacts on certain demographic groups. And then again, the interactive map of the same data, just looking at that state or that place that you're looking at this report on, so you can highlight that. Scrolling down a little bit more, we also have, you can look at trends over time. So this is data on market concentration and how this has changed going back to 1998. And looking at this data in different ways, again, starting to look at some of the correlations through a scatter plot. Again, this is just visualizing the same data and allowing people to explore this data in different ways and creating those visualizations, making those visualizations more accessible. So these are all the report sections that I just scrolled through. You can also click on one to navigate to the top. Again, I'll just wrap up by sharing that the overview of the project and information on our data and methodology is also on the tool and on the website. You can dive deep into some of the technical and sort of data wrangling, technical pieces and data wrangling that we went through to pull in all these data sets together, and then read more in the case studies, which Melanie will highlight next. So I'm going to stop sharing, and what questions can I answer? Or Melanie, I'll hand it back to you.
That was awesome. Thank you, Susan. There have been some questions rolling through in the chat that Dylan and Aaron have been addressing, but if you want to go through and take a look at them, you're welcome to. That was so great. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. As Susan mentioned, here are some of the many data sources that we used to get the information that populated this map. Again, the methodology section of the map is really, really interesting if you are interested in checking it out and understanding a bit more about how we figured out food access or concentration metrics. So what have we learned? We started with gathering the national data on corporate concentration depicted by the map on the left, as Susan showed us, using data from the year 2000. Overall, market concentration has increased dramatically since then, with 3 parent companies, Walmart, Kroger, and Albertson, steadily dominating and capturing the majority of the money entering the grocery industry. The map on the right visualizes concentration data from 2020. In comparing market dominance across states over 2 decades, starting in 2000 and ending in 2023, it becomes clear that on average, a small number of corporations have captured over half of the market share in food retail. As Susan mentioned, the areas in dark magenta are areas that are more concentrated, more consolidated, while the areas that are in gray, light pink are less consolidated. And we can see how that dark magenta has started creeping eastward, as well as toward the edges of the map. Another way of measuring market dominance is using a CR4 ratio. This percentage represents the combined market share of the 4 largest companies in an industry, in this case, the grocery industry. In 2000, an average of 42.5% of a state's food retail market share went to 4 dominating corporations. This still left more than half of that market share for small independent grocery, regional chains, localized food retailers that could meet a community's needs. By 2023, 4 companies had dominated 67% of the grocery market, where 20 years ago, more than half of the money spent in grocery went to smaller food retailers, local retailers. By 2023, corporate grocery had locked down nearly 70% of the money going into the grocery industry. As you may recall from Susan's presentation, the Grocery Gap Atlas has a feature for discerning more about a corporation's market share. This map highlights in yellow all the areas where Kroger has a 30% or higher share of the grocery retail market. Kroger is the 2nd largest grocery retailer in the country. This map highlights in yellow all the areas where Albertson has a 30% or higher share of the grocery retail market. About 2 years ago, Kroger announced a planned $24.6 billion deal to acquire the nation's 4th largest grocer, Albertsons. If allowed to proceed, Kroger would become the 2nd largest grocery chain in the US, with a market share nearly as large as Walmart's. You can see on the left are Kroger subsidiaries like Ralph's, JC, King Soopers, and on the right are Albertsons subsidiaries like Star Market, Shaw's, and King's. In an attempt to make the merger more palatable, Kroger and Albertson have announced plans to divest and sell 579 Albertson stores to C&S Wholesale Grocers, a wholesaling company that currently operates 23 retail stores. Of those stores, Colorado, Arizona, and Washington have the highest number of stores that are planned to be divested. Using the reports feature of the Grocery Gap Atlas, we can take a closer look at the data for the counties whose municipalities will have the most store divestitures within those states. Of the 91 stores to be divested in Colorado, 67% of them are in Denver County, and all of them are Albertsons locations. Kroger currently dominates 33% of the grocery retail market in Denver County, as we can see from our pie chart here. And that's a percentage that only stands to get larger after selling 56 competing Albertsons locations across the county. Should the merger pass, Kroger Albertsons plans to divest 101 Albertsons stores across Arizona. Of that 101, 66% of those stores are in Maricopa County. With a market share of nearly 25%, Kroger stands to gain a further lead on Walmart, who is second behind them, by absorbing and divesting 67 Albertsons stores. Finally, in King County, Washington, Kroger holds 28% of the market share, with Albertsons just behind them at 27% of the market share. Of the 124 Albertsons stores to be divested in Washington, 41% of them are located in King County, allowing Kroger a much larger share of the market than it could ever have when competing with Albertsons. This is not the first time that Washington has seen an Albertsons merger. When Albertsons merged with Safeway in 2014, it sold 146 Safeway stores to a small Washington-based grocery chain called Hagen. Within 6 months, Hagen had closed 127 of those locations and laid off thousands of workers. By 2016, Albertsons had acquired Hagen, as well as the remaining Safeway stores that survived the merger, for a fraction of what they had originally been paid. Many of the stores that were divested were no longer opened again as grocery stores, leaving the areas where they were in food apartheid conditions. If the Kroger-Albertsons merger succeeds, Kroger would own 15% of all grocery stores in the US, which would make them second only to Walmart. For context, on what Walmart's market share looks like. We saw this map when Susan showed it to us. But this map highlights all the areas in which Walmart has a 30% or higher market share of the retail market, of the grocery retail market. They have grown exponentially over the last 10 years and have claimed 27% of the grocery market share across the country. Of the 10 states with the highest single company market share, Walmart dominates 6 of them. When we compare the combined market share of Kroger, Albertsons, and Walmart side by side, their domination over the grocery industry becomes more apparent. An analysis by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance found that the proposed merger would ultimately give these entities more than 70% of the market share across 160 cities. Through our observation of the data about market concentration over the last 20 years, we can discern that the goal of corporate grocery is to maximize market share and profit, not to make food accessible for everyone. So, how does concentration impact food access? When we analyze the correlations between concentration, mapped on the left, and food access, mapped on the right, the Grocery Gap Atlas found that concentration is negatively correlated with food access. This means that areas with higher concentration tend to have worse food access. You'll notice that both maps show high levels of concentration and poor food access in the rural West, as well as the Southwest, the Mississippi Delta, and Appalachia. This phenomenon is more pronounced across different geographies and demographics. When analyzing data in urban, suburban, and rural areas, the data showed a slightly stronger negative correlation between concentration and food access in rural areas. This suggests that where rural areas experience higher concentration, food access tends to be worse overall. We consider areas with this overlapping negative correlation to be areas of concern. Now, the Grocery Gap Atlas can make granular census tract level analyses based on demographic, poverty level, economic disadvantage, but it can't tell us about the communities that live in census tracts of concern and what they have in common. So we used existing typologies from the American Communities Project to help us understand what make these disparate areas similar from a communal perspective. The American Communities Project uses a vast array of data to categorize communities into different types for analysis, using factors that include income, race, ethnicity, education, religious affiliation. The ACP identifies 15 types of counties listed on the right and has mapped these types to show political, socioeconomic, and cultural discrepancies across the country. When we analyzed the correlation between concentration and food access across those ACP typologies, 2 of those communities stood out: aging farmlands and Native American lands. Of the 477 census tracts in aging farmlands, over 82% of them are tracts of concern. Of the 274 census tracts in Native American lands, over 53% of them are tracts of concern. Despite having much larger populations, it's also worth noting that census tracts in rural Middle America, Hispanic centers, graying America, and big cities also experience high levels of concentration and poor food access, with an average total of 10.6% tracts of concern. I've thrown a lot of data points and percentages at you, but they are representative of hundreds of thousands of people who experience food apartheid conditions as a direct result of corporate concentration of the grocery industry. We grounded some of this data in a case study of a Nebraska cooperative called Post 60. The Emerson is the town in Nebraska where Post 60 is, and their last grocery store closed in 2018. The residents observing this raised funds to purchase a local American Legion and convert it into a cooperatively owned grocery store. Post 60 serves 3 counties in a 25-mile radius. And if we refer back to our community typologies, their census tracts fall within Native American lands, aging farmlands, and Hispanic centers. The census tracts in Emerson have some of the highest negative correlations in the entire country, reinforcing the data stating that rural and non-white communities experience food insecurity at higher rates due to structural factors like corporate concentration. Now, owning a cooperative isn't a cure-all. Grocery margins are tight, and many similar food retailers struggle to procure stock at a price range that competes with corporate level grocery. They can secure grant funding and approvals to use WIC and SNAP, and that will allow and help smaller community-focused grocery stores to stay open, but there's still a lot of work to do to ensure in the long-term survival of grocery stores competing in a highly consolidated market. So based on what we've learned from analyzing the data through the Grocery Gap Atlas, corporations make decisions that favor dominating the market, not creating equitable food access. The monopsony grocery conditions impact food access nationally and locally, and rural geographies and non-white census tracts face the highest risk of negative correlation. An outsized market share gives corporations an enormous advantage over the market. It allows them to strong-arm suppliers into offering them discounts on their stock, discounts that are then recouped by charging smaller grocery stores higher prices for their stock. It allows them to exploit producers with lowball contracts and restricted market access. And it allows them to escape accountability to their thousands of employees and hundreds of thousands of consumers whose grocery options are growing fewer and fewer. Ultimately, the goal of the Grocery Gap Atlas is to create substantial data analysis that can more reliably inform policy decisions addressing concentration in the grocery industry, and to engage the public, and to advocate for solutions. Some of those uses we'll talk about now with Aaron as he talks about future uses of the tool.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, so we really started this work a couple of years ago because we recognized that the population of farmers that we're supporting has evolved over the years. And as you've seen through this presentation, the grocery sector and its associated supplying sector has really concentrated. And one thing that we know about the food system is that roughly like 98% of the groceries that people buy are bought in grocery stores compared to the under 1% that are bought in farmers markets. And so that means that the vast majority of the food that people in the United States are consuming is routed through this infrastructure that is increasingly being dominated by fewer and fewer corporations. And that has foreclosed market access for a lot of the producers we support. That particular dynamic of this problem is harder to track with publicly available data. But we know that a lot of these producers are also residents in areas that are tracts of concern in this map. So they've both experienced this from the angle of struggling to get market access for their products as farmers, but also struggling to have equitable access to food as grocery shoppers. What we wanted to do is build public awareness to the impacts of corporate concentration in the grocery industry, both on food access and on regional food system development. In the coming year, we're interested in gathering more stories about successful grocery enterprises in areas of concern. And we're hoping to build more functionality on the website that you've been shown today to allow people who are doing interesting projects like grassroots grocery cooperatives or other like types of enterprises like that to submit to a form and let us know what they're doing and become part of a network that is trying to build awareness to the need for a more distributed and resilient grocery landscape. And we hope to build that towards actual policy proposals. And there are some out there already. There has been a lot of energy in the past year or two around beginning to enforce again an old bill called the Robinson-Patman Act. A lot of smaller independent and cooperative grocery stores struggle to get prices for the supplies that they bring into their grocery stores that are competitive with major dominant chains like Walmart, because Walmart can force their suppliers to offer them lower prices than their competitors because of how dominant they are. It's actually illegal. It's just we haven't enforced the laws that make that illegal since the 70s, and we could enforce them again. So that's one avenue of change that our organization and others are pursuing. There are also bills that have been introduced in Congress that would tighten even further enforcement against further mergers, as well as instituting retroactive review of mergers that have been approved in the past, like the Safeway Albertsons merger that Melanie mentioned. Specifically, one of the best pieces of legislation on this front is the Fairness for Small Farmers and Ranchers Act, which is actually a lot more broad and all-encompassing than just focusing on farmers and ranchers. It institutes a food system-wide merger moratorium and gives antitrust enforcers the more authority to institute retroactive review of previous mergers. And we think that's an excellent policy design that's worth supporting. We're also interested in exploring new policy interventions designed to invest in and increase the support for the viability of independent, cooperative, or regionally scaled grocery enterprises, especially in areas of concern. We don't exactly know all of what that looks like. That's why we want to be in more conversation with enterprises that are on the front line of that work. But we think that there are probably levers to pull at the federal level that haven't been thought of before to put more federal support behind a more resilient and distributed grocery sector than we are currently doing. Because what we want to do is ensure that there's a reproliferation of regionally rooted grocery enterprises that create new markets for regionally scaled producers and better access and more equitable access to culturally relevant diets for everyone. That's what we all deserve. And every community should have access to a grocery store that does that. And what we've seen today is that there are far too many communities that don't. And that is a result of a sector that has not been designed to meet all of our food needs. It's been designed to optimally extract as much profit as possible from the most profitable geographies. That's what we have gotten from the food system that is designed by corporate empires. And we actually deserve a food system that is designed to deliver equitable food access and equitable market access to all food consumers and food producers.
Well said. Um, with that, we will enter our Q&A section. Please feel free to ask us whatever you'd like, and we'll do our best to answer. I'm about to catch up in the chat, so please feel free to put your questions there if you'd like. Let's see, we have some questions rolling in. One of them was, are you able to map or monitor access to cultural foods in grocery stores? That is a great question. You may recall in our pie chart in the reports feature that shows you the market dominance of certain corporations, that there was an other tab. That other tab includes small grocery stores, ethnic grocery stores that may not have a corporate profile the way that Food Lion or Kroger or Albertsons does. I don't know if Susan, you have more thoughts on this.
No, I think this is that's a good direction to point to in this particular tool. But I think more broadly, this question is really important, and I am not aware of like a formal data set or how industry monitors this, for example. Like I would imagine that there's so much data on there's so much private data on the grocery industry that these companies collect, and they sell to other companies. There's so much data out there. I wonder if they are capturing information on sort of some of the cultural foods. I guess it also depends on what you mean by that, Emily, but I'm not aware of any like publicly available research into that, but I think it's so important to understand how and if those markets and those needs are being met. So unfortunately, I don't know if I'm not aware of having access, or I'm not aware of the data on that existing publicly now, but I do think it's really important and we should push for it in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious if you have anything to add to this, Susan, but another question was, do we have data on dollar stores? And we do have data on dollar stores.
Yes, we do have data on dollar stores. On the Grocery Gap Atlas, this was really interesting because, okay, zoom out, big picture, we know that dollar stores have been playing an increasingly larger role in offering groceries, even having some produce, and sometimes not. That's not, I think, the default, but they're often the only store retail location that's selling food, that's selling groceries, whether or not they have any fresh produce. Or healthy food options. So we did include that. So we wanted to include grocery stores, but also understanding that they're not, we wanted to include dollar stores, but they're not supermarkets. They're like they're sort of like filling this role that they've kind of constructed of a role of filling the needs of grocery stores in small, often rural communities, often low income communities, but they're not supermarkets. So we do have data in there, and you can differentiate looking at some of those summary statistics by including dollar stores and not including dollar stores in the data set. So definitely check that out on the Atlas and in the data to start to get a sense of those trends.
Yeah, thank you. The next couple questions are also about data points. One of them was asking, do we have mapping and statistics on independent grocery stores? To my knowledge, we don't have access to public information about this. And the other question were, are there any data points on percentages of grocery retailers accepting SNAP and WIC?
So there is information out there on which grocery stores accept SNAP and WIC. Those grocery stores, in order to participate in those programs, those being federal food assistance programs, those grocery stores have to go through an application process and they have to be certified. So that information is tracked and collected, but it is it would be very interesting, I think, to integrate in this tool in the future. We didn't get it into this first round of the sort of data that we included in this tool, but it absolutely would add a really interesting and relevant dimension to looking at this data altogether. But yes, that data is out there. It can be it's not always available in like one location. Often it's like different state agencies that are tracking it because states administer those programs as well. So yeah, it's a really complicated system, and hence the data is complicatedly available, but difficult to access.
Yeah, which is part of why we created this tool, to bring together a lot of different disparate data points together into one visually cohesive tool. Let's see if we are at time. We are at 1 p.m., so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming here and being interested in how corporate concentration affects our food system. Thank you to Susan and Dylan for sharing so much of their time and their expertise with us. And thank you, Erin, for putting all this together. If you have any more questions or are interested in learning more, ideas, anything, please feel free to get in touch. My email is connected to this Zoom meeting, and I will be following up with a recording of the webinar as well as some of the resources we used to put this presentation together. So thank you very much and have a great Friday afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.